Hey, welcome everyone to Engaging the Mind. Typically, I say where it's time for bite sized theology. However, Engaging the Mind is expanding, and not only are we going to deal with theology, but we're going to deal with biblical worldview. We're going to wrestle with other worldviews. We'll even deal with politics. But I know that Engaging the Mind has been, the podcast has been off for a while. That's because I've been focusing my time and attention on Ask the Pastor, which is another podcast that I have. But I want to thank you for tuning in to Engaging the Mind, and I pray that you'll subscribe and encourage others to do the same. Now, the purpose of Engaging the Mind is to transform the heart. We want to engage the mind with the ultimate purpose of transforming the heart. Now, there's something on my heart that I'd like to share with you today. And it's very personal. Anybody who's known me for any length of time knows that I usually don't shy away from any issue, but specifically controversial issues. And for that reason, for 20 plus years now, as long as I've been saved and have been a pastor, I've been very vocal about what the Bible says about abortion. I've never shied away from that. I've pastored 4 churches, and all 4 churches where I have pastored in the past 20 years, I have called abortion murder. I have said that it is unbiblical and that we ought to stand against it. Now, for 20 plus years, I've said that within the context of the pro-life movement. And I've always considered myself not just a pro-lifer, but an aggressive pro-lifer. However, I want to share with you today about some things that we ought to think about as it relates to being a Christian and being pro-life. I want to challenge your way of thinking as mine has been challenged here recently. Now, let me go ahead and in case there's anybody out there saying, you know, pastors have no business talking about politics or whatever it may be, let me go ahead and clarify something real quick. I had someone say to me one time when I was talking about abortion, they said, why are you bringing politics into the pulpit? And I said to them that abortion was a Bible issue long before it was a political issue. And so it's always been a biblical issue with God. God has always condemned those who kill the innocent. God brought judgment upon the nation of Israel when they were sacrificing their children to the false god Molech. And so this is a biblical issue, and it's one the church cannot be silent on. We must be vocal. Now, I told you before that for many years, I would have considered myself not just a pro-lifer, but an aggressive pro-lifer. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. That means I preached against abortion from the pulpit. I called it murder. I would even work with legislatures to get bills adopted to become law in order to regulate to abortion, in order to try to make it hard here in the state of Oklahoma for a woman to have an abortion. And so I've worked for many years with our state legislatures. But I'm going to tell you right now that I have become very disgruntled with what we know as the pro-life movement. And let me tell you why. Many pro-lifers will say that abortion is bad, but they won't come out and say that it's murder. Now, this is something that I've observed in talking with other pastors. I'm amazed at how many pastors will dance around the issue. They'll agree that abortion is bad, but very few are willing to say that abortion is murder. Now, why is that? We're not to be compromisers. We are to say what the Bible says. And the taking of an innocent life is murder. And so I've become disgruntled with pro-lifers because whether it be a legislator or whether it be a pastor in the pulpit, very few are willing to say abortion is murder, and I think that's just spineless. I'm sorry, I just believe it is. Another reason I've become disgruntled with the pro-life movement is because pro-lifers believe that Roe versus Wade is king. They believe it's the law of the land, and there's nothing that we can do about ending abortion until Roe versus Wade is overturned. Now, that's what the typical pro-lifer believes, that Roe versus Wade is king. And so, therefore, we have to bow down to it until it's overturned. Well, let me just say something. Donald Trump is no longer president, but he was president for 4 years. And not only was he president for 4 years, he was also able to appoint 2 Supreme Court justices, which caused us to have a more conservative lean in the Supreme Court. And Donald Trump did not reverse Roe versus Wade. The Supreme Court did not reverse Roe versus Wade. And so I don't have any hopes that Roe versus Wade is going to be overturned in the future, especially in light of our current political climate and the way that things are going. And so this idea that Roe versus Wade is king, it's the law of the land, so we must submit to it until it's overturned, is foolish. It's just blatantly foolish. Now, I'm going to get to that here in just a moment, but let's be honest. Roe versus Wade, which has been the so-called law of the land for the last 46 years, is nothing more than the approval of mass murder. That's it. It's a law that approves genocide. I mean, since Roe versus Wade became law, for the past 46 years, over 60 million babies have been murdered. And you've got pastors in pulpits who won't even preach against it. You've got pastors in pulpits that won't say anything about it. You've got pastors in pulpits who won't call it murder. Now, again, I've got brothers out there who do, and I thank God for them, but the vast majority won't. I have a hard time sitting in my office each week preparing sermons knowing that down the road babies are being aborted. And so I've become disgruntled with the pro-life movement. I mean, my goodness, abortion's not bad. It's murder, and pro-lifers need to realize that. And pro-lifers need to realize that Roe versus Wade is not king. Jesus is king. Therefore, we must submit to Jesus and oppose Roe versus Wade. We must bow down to Jesus and not the Supreme Court. It is an unrighteous decree that has been handed down to us, and the states have just bowed down to it. And we need a grassroots movement of people who will rise up and say, we will not bow the knee to Roe v. Wade. We will no longer sit idly by as babies are being murdered every single day. In the state where I live, over 5,000 babies a year, on average, are aborted. Now, let me tell you a story. Yesterday, I was down at one of the abortion mills here in Oklahoma City, South Oklahoma City. And I was standing at the gate, and this man pulled in. I stepped out in front of him, and I said, "Sir, can I talk to you for a moment?" He rolled down his window. He said to me, "I'm with the funeral home." So he went on in. The funeral home director stepped out of his vehicle with a baby casket. He walks into the abortion mill, gets the baby, and walks out with the casket. Now let that sink into your mind just for a moment. A funeral home shows up at the abortion mill and carries out a baby casket. Don't sit here and tell me people don't know what they're doing. Babies are being murdered. There is a mass murdering that is happening right here under our watch, a genocide here in the state of Oklahoma. And I am fed up with the spinelessness that I am seeing from many pro-lifers. I am disgruntled. Pro-lifers. Another reason I'm disgruntled with the pro-life movement is because of incrementalism. You know, here's the way a typical pro-life legislator thinks. Well, Roe v. Wade is law. We can't end abortion until Roe v. Wade is overturned. And so let's regulate abortion by gradually introducing pro-life legislation. And so let's take an incremental approach. Often you'll hear pro-life legislators say this: it's just like a football game. We want to kick the ball down the field 1 yard at a time. Well, we've been doing that for 46 years now, and 60 million babies have been aborted. Are we going to keep that approach up? Are we going to keep trying to regulate abortion? Are we going to take the gradual approach? Are we going to take the incremental approach and keep kicking the ball down the field? Now let me bring that same analogy back. You can use a football game as an analogy, but I also know this: every football game has a beginning and an end. A football game doesn't go on forever. It doesn't go on for 46 years. And let me say that it's time for the game to be over. We need to punch the ball across the goal line. You say, well, that's great, but Roe v. Wade is still law. How are we going to end abortion when Roe v. Wade is still law? Listen, we nullify. We say to Roe v. Wade that, and we say to the Supreme Court that thanks but no thanks. And we encourage our governor and we encourage our legislatures to adopt bills of abolition to say no more will we kick the ball down the field. We believe that abortion ought to end now. We believe that it ought to be abolished now. And we are going to stand and say, if you will do this, Governor, if you will do this, legislators, we will stand with you. We will stand with you. And so one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast today is because I hope others will hear it and that you'll stand with me. Now, listen, I've grown disgruntled with the pro-life movement. They want to regulate abortion. They want to keep kicking the ball down the field as babies are being murdered. They believe Roe v. Wade is the law, and we have to bow down to it. And they believe that abortion's bad, but they won't come out and call it murder. Now, think about this. The longer we implement regulations, we prolong abortion. Again, that's that incremental approach. Well, let's just keep passing pro-life bills with the hopes that maybe one day, let's keep passing all these pro-life bills with the hopes that maybe one day Roe v. Wade will be overturned. But until then, we've got to take this gradual approach. And while that's happening, more babies die. We've got to come to a point where we say no exceptions. Abortion must be abolished. It must end. We must encourage our legislators to support abortion bills that abolish abortion immediately, without exception. Without exception. Now, of course, some people would say, well, what about the exception of the mother's health? Shouldn't we have a law that says abortion is murder except in case of a mother's health? Now, listen to me. That opens the door wide open for abortion. I mean, all a woman has to do is say that her baby gives her a migraine, or that she's contemplating suicide because she's pregnant. And the next thing you know, she's going to be allowed to have an abortion. I mean, that's a loophole. A loophole. As a matter of fact, I would challenge somebody to send me an email or whatever it may be. Send me an article of where a baby had to be murdered in order to save a woman's life. I'll be happy to read it. I'll even come back on this podcast and talk about it. But the reality is it doesn't happen. It's an excuse. Most women abort their babies because, I say most women. When health reasons are brought up, it's because a lot of women, their baby has a birth defect or whatever it may be, and so they don't want to have to deal with it. So abortion's the easy way. And so all a woman has to do is say that she has a health concern, and it could be a mental health concern, it could be whatever it may be. And so therefore we must pass bills, or we must pass an abortion bill that abolishes abortion immediately without exception. And listen, and let's go ahead and let's try to agree on something. If you're truly listening to me with a spirit of wanting to learn. I had to learn all this stuff. I was opposed to all these things at the beginning. But I'm thankful that God allowed me to sit down and listen and to open my Bible and to say, what does the Bible clearly teach? What's biblical? It may not be popular, but it's biblical. Now think about this. Let's say that you have a baby who's already born, and you have a baby who's in the womb. Which of those two babies is more human? So again, you have a baby who's already born, and you have a baby who's still in the womb. My question is which of those two babies is more human? The answer is they're both human. They are both 100% human beings. Now, let's say that someone kills the baby who's already born. Should that person be criminalized? No brainer, right? Of course, if somebody kills a baby that's already been born, they should be criminalized for that. Why? Because it's a human being. Now apply that same logic to a baby that hasn't been born yet. It's just as much a human being as the baby that's already been born. So if somebody murders that baby, shouldn't they be criminalized? Absolutely. That's why God judged the nation of Israel when they killed their babies and offered them up to the false god Molech. Listen, folks, I would say that the majority of, I don't know if I want to say majority. I'll say this. A lot of pro-lifers, when they kneel down and pray, if they do, they will say, God, stop the murder of babies. It must stop now. Which means they want abortion abolished on their knees when they pray. But very few are willing to stand up and call abortion murder and plead for abolition on their feet. I'm asking for you and whoever else may listen to this, stand up on your feet and let's join together and let's say that abortion is murder and it must stop now. Join with me and many others in seeking to support legislation that actually does what it's supposed to do and ends abortion. We don't have to wait for Roe v. Wade to be overturned. We can nullify now. We can stand against this unrighteous decree and declare it evil, just like the 3 Hebrew slaves captive in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar said, worship this golden image. And they said, nope, we will not. Even though everybody else is doing it, we will not obey your decree, O king. Our God, whom we believe, is able to deliver us, but even if he chooses not to, we still will not bow down to you, O king. In 1850, there were states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Vermont and New York and Massachusetts that interposed on behalf of the victims of slavery, and they nullified against the Fugitive Slave Act, they nullified, and as a result, we no longer have slavery today. Wouldn't it be great if Oklahoma was the first state to stand up and nullify against Roe v. Wade? To be the first state where abortion is outlawed? Well, it's going to take the church arising, pastors leading. It's going to take a grassroots movement, and it's going to take a change of heart, change of mind, and a change of heart in our state legislators. So join with me in engaging the mind and, with the purpose of transforming the heart. I pray that you'll think deeply about the things that you heard today, and listen, until we meet again, serve the King.